Welcome to Training Tuesday. We're so happy to have you with us today. Let's go over our agenda. Today we're going to cover our updates and reminders. We're going to go over close versus cancel, bid amendments, sole source, brand name. We'll tell you where you can find some additional training, and we'll end with our Tuesday takeaway. On our updates and reminders, please make sure to use the most recent job aids. There have been recent updates. This Thursday, we will be holding our next Procurement Methods Invitation for Bid course and have a few limited spots available. Please note that the specifications course is a prerequisite for attending. We will not have Training Tuesday next week, April 29th. Let's start things off with closing versus canceling. The first step in determining if a bid can be closed is to answer the question, were any bids received? If no bids were received, then the agency can publish a cancellation notice using a bid amendment and then close the bid. If bids were received, the agency will have to determine if an award will be made. If an award will be made, the agency will not close or cancel the bid. Instead, it will be advanced to a PO. In fact, you will not see a closed bid option if a vendor has been selected. If bids were received and no items are being selected for award or no quotes are submitted for a bid, you will have the option to select closed bid solicitation. When the award checkbox is not checked for any items on the Items tab within the Bid tab, the Close Bid Solicitation button appears on the Summary tab within the bid tabulation. If no quotes are submitted, Close Bid Solicitation appears when you open the bid. This allows you to move a bid from open status to closed and will help you clean up your queue by differentiating between opened and closed bids. When an agency wishes to close a bid, it is imperative to publish a bid amendment with the required information per the rules. Prior to closing a bid tab, the agency must navigate to the Quotes tab on the bid tab and deselect Consider All. Make sure to hit Save and Continue, or BidBuy will not save this change. After deselecting Consider All, the agency may proceed to the Bid tab Summary to close the bid. Please note that if you do not deselect Consider All prior to closing a bid, it shows responding vendor information, which includes all pricing that was submitted, even if it was an RFP unopened pricing prior to closing. Therefore, do not forget to deselect Consider All on the Quotes tab of the Bid tab. Canceling a bid. You will never select the Cancel Bid button on the Bid Summary tab for a bid that was in sent status. Cancel bid will detach any vendor quote attachments, thus the procurement file would not be complete and intact. Do not select the Cancel Bid button. Remember, you cannot uncancel a bid. Section 1.2040B2 requires that the cancellation notice be published on BidBuy. Using this cancellation process, you will assure that you are adhering to the rules and the code. If you select the Cancel button on the Summary tab, you are not in compliance with the procurement code and rules. If a solicitation needs to be canceled, utilize the bottom of the IFB or RFP job aid for the steps required to create a bid amendment for the cancellation notice. And once again, do not select the Cancel Bid button. And remember, you cannot uncancel a bid. It's important to know that there are rules regarding when a cancellation may occur and how they must be published. Section 1.2040B provides cancellations of solicitation. Rejection of all bids or proposals must be published. A solicitation may be canceled in whole or in part when the SPO determines in writing that the action is in the state's best interest for reasons including, but not limited to, this state no longer requires the supplies or services, this state no longer can reasonably expect to fund the procurement. Proposed amendments to the solicitation would be of such magnitude a new solicitation is desirable. Ambiguous or otherwise inadequate specifications. The solicitation did not provide for consideration of all factors of significance to the state. Prices exceed available funds, and it would not be appropriate to adjust quantities to come within available funds. All otherwise acceptable bids or proposals received are at clearly unreasonable prices, or there is reason to question whether the bids or proposals may not have been independently arrived at in open competition, may have been collusive, or may have been submitted in bad faith. Please recall that these reasons are reserved for during the solicitation and prior to the award of the publication. Per section 1.2040D covers if an award has already been published. If the award has been published, then the contract award may be canceled if the SPO or CPO determines in the discharge of his or her duty that there was a violation of the code or this part after the contract was awarded. Nothing in the code or this part compels an SPO to approve a contract if an award was made. If you have a bid that needs to be canceled, do not select the cancel button. Instead, you will need to publish a cancellation notice. Per section 1.2040B3 of the procurement rules, the agency and SPO must assure that all of the following are included in the cancellation that is published in BidBuy via a bid amendment when the cancellation occurs. The solicitation must be identified. By posting the amendment on the bid, it is clear which solicitation is being canceled. You must also include the reason for the cancellation or rejection must be provided. Please refer back to the previous two slides to determine what section of the code and rules should be included in the cancellation notice, which will depend if it is pre or post award notice. Finally, the agency should clearly state whether or not they intend to resolicit for these goods or services. If an agency intends to resolicit and a FOIA is received, it will assist the FOIA officer in knowing whether releasing information regarding this cancellation may complicate the future solicitation. The FOIA officer will not likely be able to determine solely on this statement, but it can provide a quick indication on what the agency has planned. Additionally, it gives the vendors a heads up to continue to be on the lookout for a resolicitation. Now let's take a look at bid amendments. When you are publishing a bid amendment, the portion of the solicitation being amended must be referenced. Attachments being added or changed must be identified. Bid amendments must be published at least 72 hours prior to the date or time for submitting the bid. The due date and time must be extended if the amendment can't be published 72 hours in advance. This means that if you need to publish a bid amendment within the 72-hour window, you will need to extend the bid opening date and time to allow vendors a reasonable amount of time to see and respond to the amendment. You can unselect Show Vendor if a revised document versions are being published, but do not delete previously published documents. Again, this 72-hour window would not apply to bid amendments being published to cancel prior to award or after award, because again, the solicitation bid opening date would have already passed. If you are receiving questions from vendors in relation to an active procurement and you need your end user's input on how to respond, please assure to remove the vendor's identifying factors from the question, meaning please do not forward the vendor's email to your end user. The best practice should be for the procurement person to compile all questions into a Word document and send that to your end user without any identifying factors in regards to which vendors are asking which questions. Allowing the end user to see which vendor is asking the question could potentially render a biased answer. Now we're going to jump into sole sources, which is one of the 6 procurement methods identified by the Illinois Procurement Code. Per Section 1.2025 of the Procurement Rules, we define sole source and sole economically feasible source. A sole source procurement is permissible when a requirement is available from only a single supplier. A sole economically feasible procurement is permissible when only one supplier is deemed economically feasible. The sole source justification form must be utilized by agencies to represent their request to enter into a sole source or sole economically feasible source. The agency should be asking themselves questions in preparation for a hearing while they are developing their answers on the SSJF. The agency will need to input the full bid number, not the rec number, in the top right along with the agency name. Section 1 gathers general information such as agency info, need by date, who the vendor is, a brief description of the sole source, the value, and if it is a sole source or sole economically feasible source. The differentiation of a sole source versus sole economically feasible source is important here because the rest of the SSJF will be reviewed in that manner. For instance, if you select that this is a sole economically feasible source, but never provide justification to support why it is the most economical, it is not likely to be approved. Section 2 requires the agency to define what type of term the contract will have if the sole source is approved. If it is a one-time purchase, then the agency will not have the additional fields showing as they are on the screen. If the agency is requesting a term contract, the fields shown to collect the information will appear. The agency must fill in the estimated begin and end date. The 3 lines that refer to renewals shall be left blank or input in A for not applicable. This form is generated by the Procurement Policy Board and is used by all CPO offices. This is the reason that the renewal fields still appear, but it is important to note that the CPOGS does not utilize the renewal option for sole source procurements. If the resulting contract needs to extend past 12 months, the agency will select the applicable box and provide a detailed justification for why it should exceed 1 year. If the justification is insufficient, your SPO will work with you to provide further information that would support your request or have you reduce the sole source requested term length. The agency will identify their funding source in Section 3. In Section 4, the agency will select the primary justification. This primary justification must be the same as the bid general tab selection. The orange box at the bottom is a screenshot of the corresponding section in bid buy. If the agency has additional justifications that they feel support the sole source, then you may select yes on the sole source justification form and provide up to 2 additional justifications. These will not be reflected though in bid buy. The agency is required to provide the history of any previous procurements completed for these same supplies or services in Section 5. Your SPO is looking to see what the past relationship with the vendor has been. Some questions that SPOs have can be answered by this section. For instance, has the agency ever issued a competitive solicitation? Has the pricing stayed steady or increased significantly? If there is no history, the SPO will go into the next section knowing that the agency is trying to start a new relationship for supplies or services without competition. Section 6 of the sole source justification form has 9 questions for the agency to fill out. The first question will prompt the agency to provide a detailed explanation of the supplies or services. Anyone reviewing this form should be able to understand what the agency does, how these supplies or services will be used by the agency to meet their agency's mission, and how it affects your end users, not just within your agency, but from a constituent's view as well. Overall, we are looking to see how the supplies or services are used by the agency. The next question prompts the agency to provide detailed specifications. These specifications shouldn't be written as if you are writing specs that vendors would respond to for an RFP or IFB. These should clearly define what this vendor will specifically provide the agency if the sole source is approved. If there are supplies, please define how many of each are being received and any other features that they must include. An example may be a warranty. If you are requesting services, a detail of how many hours, the titles, etc. will need to be provided. If you have a detailed SOW that you need to include for services, you can refer to an attachment. This section will be utilized to build the resulting contract if the SSJF is approved. If there are specifications that the agency presents in the resulting contract that were not introduced in the sole source justification form, it may cause the contract not to be approved for execution. Please make sure to include everything that will be needed or required by the resulting contract. Questions 3 and 4 seem very similar, but they are asking for separate justifications. Question 3 is specific to why these specific supplies or services must be used to meet the agency's needs. Whereas question 4 requires the agency to fully explain why this vendor must be the one used. Sometimes it can be difficult to differentiate the supply or service from the vendor providing it. However, the agency will need to be able to concisely answer both of these questions. And please do not use the same answer for both of these responses. Section 5 requires the agency to note whether or not alternatives were considered. If they were considered, the agency will see 5A, 5B, and 5C. Questions appear after selecting yes. In these questions, the agency needs detail what research was done and when it was completed to determine that this is the only vendor that can provide these supplies or services to meet the agency's needs. Justifications such as, we really enjoy working with this vendor. They've always been good to us. We did a small purchase to start a relationship with them 20 years ago, or other such justifications will not be sufficient in explaining why alternatives weren't acceptable. If the agency selects that they have not considered alternatives, the agency will need to clearly explain why they did not research alternatives to fulfill their need in 5A. If an agency marks yes to question 6, are there resellers or distributors? It shouldn't be new news because it should have been identified in your response to question 4 in detail as to why this is the only vendor that can meet your needs. If there were resellers, question 4 should have already identified why other resellers can't be utilized. Question 7 should contain a full breakdown of all expenses that will be incurred under the resulting contract. The sum of the breakdown will need to match the value stated in Section 1. The agency will need to explain why the pricing is fair and reasonable after providing the breakdown of pricing. If the agency is seeking a sole economically feasible source, then it will need to be clear why it is the most economical for the state. If this purchase delegate the state to this vendor for future purchases, then the agency will need to select yes and provide details in 8A. Question 9 is asking for the impact it will have financially or in any other way for the state if the sole source is not approved. Will the state be in violation of a court order? Will the state have to spend significantly more money if the sole source is not approved and has not been completed within a competitive procurement? Sometimes the agency has information that may be beneficial to include, but didn't necessarily fit within any other previous responses. If this is the case, please include that in the response to question 10. This is the only questions that the agency isn't required to answer. Overall, as you complete the sole source justification form, please make sure that you are providing all the pertinent details in response. Doing so assures that your SPO, vendors, and anyone else reading the sole source justification form is able to understand what the agency is requesting to purchase outside of a competitive solicitation. Now let's go into the sole source hearing portion of sole source procurements. Once you are ready to publish your sole source justification form, you will need to review the sole source hearing schedule. You can find it by first going to the CPOGS website and selecting View All Events under the Calendar of Events. Towards the bottom of the Calendar of Events screen, you can open up the sole source hearing schedule. As you are selecting a date, you will need to take into account that the sole source must be published for a minimum of 14 days prior to the hearing date. Therefore, if we are looking at this calendar, we see that we would need to publish the sole source on bid by May 7th in order for it to be on the sole source hearing agenda for May 21st. If an agency were to publish between May 8th and May 14th, the earliest hearing agenda it could appear on is May 28th. Make sure that a representative from your agency with knowledge of the procurement is available on the hearing date should a hearing be requested. Following publication of the sole source, the SPO will alert the CPOGS office of the published sole source and have it added to the appropriate hearing agenda. The SPO will set reminders for CEI and PPB using BidBuy to send an email to each. The vendors will have until 4 p.m. the Friday before the set hearing to make a request for the hearing to be held. For instance, if the hearing date for your sole source was tomorrow, the vendor should have requested this past Friday that a hearing take place as published. The CPOGS Central Office alerts your SPOs each Monday if a hearing has been requested. Your SPO will be able to tell you if a vendor requested a hearing to take place as scheduled. Additionally, if a hearing is requested, the agency needs to be prepared for the hearing, not just already in the document. The agency needs to be able to provide responses to questions asked by the hearing officer. Additional follow-up questions may be asked after the hearing based on the information that was received. Following the hearing officer will make a recommendation to the CPO. The CPO will review and make a determination on the sole source justification form, Part 2. If no hearing is requested, then the agency will need to publish the cancellation of hearing notice, and the CPO will review and make a determination on the sole source justification form Part 2. You should always make sure to check the sole source hearing schedule prior to selecting a date. Hearings are normally available on Wednesdays at 2 p.m., but some weeks are different and have the hearing held on a different day or potentially none at all. Please be mindful of any sole sources that your agency needs in place prior to fiscal year end. The end of the fiscal year will be here before we know it. If a hearing is requested, the sole source hearing officer will oversee the hearing. The hearing officer may request for additional information to be provided following the hearing. After the hearing officer has reviewed the facts of the SSJF, what is presented at the hearing, and any other information requested, the hearing officer will provide a written recommendation to the CPO. The CPO will review the recommendation prior to making a determination on the SSJF Part 2. Therefore, depending on the circumstances, it may take longer than expected to obtain the sole source justification form Part 2 approval. To avoid delays in being able to enter into a contract, please make sure that you present sole sources early and do not wait until the last minute to get them published. Our last topic for today is brand name. It is important to note that brand name is not associated with sole source or sole economically feasible sources. Agencies may request brand name specs during a competitive procurement or small purchase to assist in defining the specifications that are required. Have you ever had a paper cut or your kid scrape their knee and the first thing you say is, "I need a Band-Aid"? Most likely any bandage would do, and you wouldn't be worried about the brand name. Have you ever been standing at a coworker's desk and feel a sneeze coming on and say, "Do you have a Kleenex?" Well, I'm sure any tissue or even a napkin would serve the intended purpose. These are examples of how brand names can infiltrate our vocabulary and become a term that we use to describe something. It's also important to remember that several brand names can be found at several different resellers. For instance, I could go to Walmart, Target, Amazon, Dollar General, or a multitude of other locations and likely be able to buy either of these brands. We discussed sole source just before diving into brand names. Please recall that sole sources are for when there is only one vendor that can provide the supplies or services. Brand name is when there's only one brand that will serve the agency's need, but there are multiple resellers or providers that the agency can purchase the brand from. An agency may also need to use brand name specification if a non-branded spec could lead to an unacceptable solution. Perhaps you are using a machine that requires a certain brand of parts, and if you use any other part with a different name on it, it will void the machine's warranty. If there were multiple resellers of that product you needed, you may be able to issue a competitive brand name only procurement. Brand name or equal shall seek to designate more than one brand as or equal and shall further state that substantially equivalent products to those designated will be considered for award, unless it is determined the essential characteristics of the brand names included in the specifications are commonly known in the industry or trade. Brand name or equal specification shall include a description of the particular design, functional, or performance characteristics that are required. You may need to utilize this option if you're struggling to completely define your specifications. So you'll use 2 or 3 brand names as examples of what you're willing to accept. But you're also willing to accept products or solutions that were not mentioned by name so long as the product or solution performs the same function as the brand stated. Brand name only specification may be used in a competitive solicitation or a request to place an order with a vendor who has a contract that was the result of a multiple award, provided the state agency makes a written request justifying that only the identified brand name item will satisfy the state's needs and the SPO approves in writing of the use of brand name only specification. So how do you have to justify a brand name only? You must utilize the brand name only justification form, which can be found in the Procurement Resource Library. Here you will need to justify why this brand name solution is the only solution that will work for your agency. Both the APO and SPO will need to sign off on the brand name only justification form, and it must be included in the procurement file. Think about these questions when you're determining if a brand name only procurement is necessary. The answers to these questions should be input into the brand name only justification form for your APO and SPO to review. Who is the brand, a product, or the actual manufacturer of what you are referencing? Who can provide this brand of items? Who needs to use the resulting contract? What is it that the needs? Does the agency specifically need the brand Kleenex, or would any facial tissue meet the needs of the agency? What does this brand do that other brands can't? Does it have a proprietary feature that connects to a system already in place? Why is there not an option to consider other brands? Would it negatively impact the agency if other brands are considered? These are all questions that you should ask yourself and is sure to provide justification for on the brand name only justification form. If there's not enough information, your APO or SPO will not be able to approve the brand name only request. Thank you again for attending today. If you have any questions, you can send those over to our CPOGS Training Center. You can find our Bid Buy system trainings on our website, along with our CPOGS Procurement Training Academy, which offers 4 courses that are approved by UPPCC for contact hours. Registration is required. Please visit our training center for all upcoming training dates. Please remember we have just a few seats available for this Thursday for Procurement Methods IFB. The dates we have available generally go very fast. Now let's take a look at our training or our Tuesday takeaway. Our fast fact is smiling can boost your mood. Science has shown that smiling, even when forced, can lift your mood, lower stress, boost your immune system, and possibly prolong your life. So happy smiling, happy Tuesday. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks again for joining us.